Stephen, it's good to have you on again. Last time we talked about basically there's a couple things we definitely need to cover again and then expand on. Last time we talked about basically the energies or what type of energies or technologies or meditative techniques were used to basically develop and construct the pyramids, particularly those in Giza in Egypt.
Well, what we're taught, again, according to the tradition taught to me by my teacher, Abdel Hakim Awayan, that we're innately born with 360 senses.
Okay.
So if we're only using five, we have 355 latent senses still there. And the idea is when this advanced ancient technology, humans were using all 360 senses.
Hmm.
So therefore, we don't lean towards aliens. We don't lead towards advanced civilization like Atlantis coming in. It was the people all around the world. So in other words, we use the term instead of Atlantis, global maritime culture.
Uh-huh.
And that shows that there was some advanced civilizations all around the world, not just centered in one area called Atlantis.
Amazing, interesting. So what type of energies do you think were actually used when constructing these pyramids? I mean, do you think it was sound vibration, or do you think it was intense meditation, or a byproduct of something?
It's a multiplicity, a multitude of different techniques.
Hmm.
I mean, yes, using mind, again, when we're operating in 360 senses, we're thinking in more than third dimension. We
Hmm.
can actually think in solid geometry. So
Interesting.
thinking in fourth and fifth dimension. So this is why we always say they'll never find blueprints for the Great Pyramid. It wasn't written down. It was all done in the mind. Mind was united. In other words, like you say, using meditative techniques or just using all the senses, people were connected telepathically so that the communication of understanding ideas would be instantaneous.
That's amazing.
And, and the idea of what energies, I mean, all the energies you could possibly think of. As I've mentioned many times when I've lectured, we cannot at this moment in time quantify or even qualify all the different types of energies the Great Pyramid produced. Electricity, electromagnetism, radio waves, quantum waves, uh, 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 all kinds of waves. And so all different types of energy that we're not even aware of. So basically, we're talking about free energy.
Interesting. So, like free energy, that kind of gets me. It almost sounds like they were using a technology we're now coming into terms with, which is like that type of nano 3D printing technology, where the computer would essentially be like the mind. The human mind would be equivalent to what would today we would call modern computing, and then there would be some kind of an intermediary which can literally construct something physical out of basically an electromagnetic frequency, which in this case would be the computer model. So is it something similar to that?
It's quite possible. It's quite possible. Because again, we're dealing with different dimensions and different energies. We're not in the third dimension all the time like we are now. But as you mentioned, this is why Hakim called this period we're in now the awakening. We're going to start to have these senses come back. Like things like 3D printers are exactly right, like cell phones, like all of these things that actually it was predicted way back by people like Tesla that we would have a device that would connect people all around the world.
Hmm.
This is what he said these things 100 years ago.
Right.
So basically what we say is we're just rediscovering that which we once knew.
Right, and that's exactly what I've heard a lot of researchers, from all spectrums, basically say. It's like inventions really aren't anything new per se. It's rather a rediscovery of what has essentially always existed.
Correct.
So,
Correct. We basically call Nikola Tesla a resurrected Cometian. I mean, he basically all the things that Tesla brought forward were what was actually used by many old civilizations at one time.
yeah, I actually, that reminded me of a quote that Tesla said, that if you want to understand the universe, you have to understand everything just in terms of vibrations. I'm sure you've
Frequency
probably
and vibration.
frequency
He
and
said
vibration,
frequency and vibration. If you understand that, you understand everything. And
everything
basically,
exactly.
he would make a statement like, we basically have unlimited sources of energy. If we could connect to the energy of a star, he would say, it could fuel our solar system for a billion years.
Right.
So, this is why he was actually talking about connecting with the energy of the universe. And this, again, we touched on this last time, but this is what's happening now in the field of physics. particularly theoretical quantum physics.
Mm-hmm.
Differing from Einstein. Einstein promulgated that the universe is vacuum, it's empty, dead, nothing
Mm-hmm.
there. He had rejected the old 19th century idea of ether, of
Uh-huh.
fact that
I
there
remember
is
that.
energy.
Right.
Now it's being brought back. You see what's happening now in the last few years, according to Einstein's predictions, when we should be able to start to measure the speed of the universe, it should be slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
If the idea is correct that they stated, there's a big bang, tremendous amount of energy, that energy thrusts all matter creation outward, and as it's going, it's supposed to be slowing down. So they said, well, once we got these satellites out there deep into space, we would be able to measure the energy of the Big Bang and see that it's decreasing. Lo and behold, what happened?
Mm.
About 4 or 5 years ago, they started to measure it and they found that the energy of the universe is increasing,
Mm-hmm.
not decreasing.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've postulated what they call dark energy,
Correct.
dark matter. It cannot be observed, it cannot be measured, but it's there.
Right.
So therefore, that is what Tesla was talking about. The universe is full of energy, and we can connect to that energy, and it's free, non-polluting. It's there for us.
Amazing. Now, what about this dark energy or dark matter? What is that exactly? Is it a certain something, or is it a
I
variety of
don't know.
things?
That's
Nobody
the
knows.
point. What's being postulated is it can't be observed and it can't be measured. So how could it's just theoretical.
Correct.
But it only serves to explain why is the universe speeding up. That means energy is acting upon it. That means there is no vacuum of space. That was one of Einstein's biggest fallacies.
Right.
Energy, we call it consciousness, whatever you want to call it, energy, it's throughout everything that exists. And we don't, and again, even to us, I just posted something on Facebook recently where a lot of the physicists are now saying they're denying that there was a Big Bang. Even Stephen Hawking himself, who did his whole doctoral work,
Correct.
his
Right.
whole reputation based on this, is now denying that.
Right.
It is now saying there may never have been a beginning. And this is what Hakim taught. This is what the indigenous wisdom keepers teach. There is no beginning. There is no end.
Mm-hmm.
Only interminable cycles in between.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%, actually, that it is just nothing but cycles and variegations of
Well,
cycles.
this is why,
within
again,
cycles.
this is why they have to say dark energy. They have to
Right.
come up with some idea to explain why their theories don't work.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what's kind of interesting about science. It always promotes something, and then it says, oh, no, we were wrong about that. And then they say, oh, no,
Exactly.
it was actually right about that. And so it's kind of
Exactly.
like, that's one of the reasons I personally got out of that field when I was studying in the formal academic world through mathematics and physics is, I think I told you this story, but I was actually, it was a middle grade physics level in the University of Southern Florida, and I went up to my professor and I asked him, well, what is electricity? Can you tell me what electricity is? And he just started quoting Maxwell's formulas and ohms and amps and resistance. He basically started giving me equations or characteristics of electricity, and I looked at him and I didn't want to be offensive, so I just kind of nodded my head, and I said, okay. And I said, but what is electricity? The essence of the substance we call electricity. What is it? He looks at me, stops like this, and I can tell I annoyed him a little bit, and he just says, I don't understand your question. And I was just like, I was thinking, and I was like, how do I rephrase this without sounding condescending? Because I was asking a legitimate question, and I think he knew what I was asking.
And the fact is, he couldn't explain it.
He couldn't explain it. And at that point, I knew, okay, I think I'm in the wrong area. If I want to understand the deeper secrets of the universe, you're probably not going to get it in a university, or at least anything, publicly available for education like I was looking.
That's why the term came in metaphysics,
Uh-huh.
beyond the normal rules of physics.
Right.
And actually, what now theoretical, as I'm saying, theoretical and quantum physics is going so far into it that they're now becoming into metaphysics.
Exactly. Ironically enough, right?
That is it. But here's you tell a great story, and I always tell a great story that was once told to me by a great teacher. There was once a man who was known as the world's expert on the sun, astrophysicist.
Okay.
The world's expert. So he's out teaching at a famous university, and he's teaching his astronomy 101 class, basic freshman class, and he's showing slides of the sun. And he's pointing out different structures on the sun on the slides to his students. Finally, there's a question, hand raises slowly in the back of the room.
Uh-huh.
Yes, he says, Professor, what is that structure that's in the middle left of the image? Professor looks at the screen. What structure? Nobody, the class is silent. Finally, a young girl in the first row raises her hand and says, I see it too. There's something there in the middle to the left of the screen.
Uh
Professor turns and looks at the screen and the image and says, I don't know. I've
huh.
never seen it before. The world's expert on the sun.
Never seen it before.
That's right.
Well,
That's
that
what science. That's the beauty of science. I
right,
mean, that's why I love science. I understand what you're saying because if you read my books, you follow my career.
right.
I'm definitely anti-academic.
Hmm.
I moved out of academia. I could not stay in academia because of their fixed paradigms.
Right.
Because it wasn't what science was purported to be. Open discussion of ideas, theories, paradigms,
Exactly.
hypotheses, and everybody feeds in, and everybody's equal. And you go out, you find evidence, you come up with a hypothesis. That's just your idea. You go out, you gather evidence, data that makes a viable theory, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But that's really, to me, science became same as religion. It has
Absolutely.
its priests, it has its rules, it has its paradigms, and if you deviate it, you're ostracized. So
Absolutely.
that's why I had to move out of academia. But we do not reject science, of
Right.
course. Our whole Kemet school is based on archaeology, geology, chemistry, physics, and engineering. And then we also use the spiritual. That's
Hmm.
the beauty of how my Hakim taught. I was just talking with his son Yusuf yesterday, who may be interested in being interviewed with you because you've been in contact with Trisha Awayan. She said there's a possibility you may be able to interview both of them, which would be great.
Let's do
Yusuf
it.
and I were talking about this yesterday, how you have to have his father taught from both sides of the brain to
Hmm.
understand this fully, like what we do. And we have it, we're going to talk about our tour in April before we're done again today because we're pushing it now. We go, we tell you what the glyphs mean. We can show you the stone, the
Hmm.
chemical, physical properties of the stone, what the sign, what the physical structure, et cetera, et cetera. Then we know because Hakim taught us where the energy is centered at
Hmm.
every site. There is what is known as the Holy of Holies. It's where the energy centered, where the nectar, that particular principle, is focused. We go there, we meditate, we connect with that energy. It opens that energy in yourself. It is opening a sense within us. That's how we teach. It cannot be done properly unless it's both sides of the brain.
Right. That's amazing. So you mentioned netter, which are basically principles, and I think last time we briefly touched on that, on the neaters or the netters.
Yes,
Um,
better.
when we were just talking about electromagnetism and formal academia, there's a question that really has always, and I think it's plagued a lot of people's minds, a lot of scientists' mind. So I want to get your take on it. What do you think gravity is?
Wow.
That's the question of the century
That's
right there.
one. Oh, we've been really fighting with that one.
Yeah.
Uh, First of all, we don't. I don't believe Einstein was totally right.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, we basically did mention this previously last time. We'll discuss it more now. There was there was a small Latvian man named Edward Leeds Skalman,
Hmm.
all of 4 foot 11, 95 pounds, who was able to lift hundreds of tons of coral by himself and produce Coral Castle in Florida.
Right.
Chris Dunn has studied this. There's a great chapter about it in his first book, The Giza Power Plant. Highly recommended.
Hmm.
Edward Leeds Skalman said he knew how the Great Pyramid was built.
I read
And
that.
he
Yeah.
said it was a function of gravity.
Hmm.
And he also said, differing from Einstein, that gravity was just a special function of magnetism.
Hmm.
In other words, he claimed the Earth is charged one way, everything that is on the Earth is charged the opposite way.
Okay.
The amount of the charge determines its weight or its gravity.
Okay.
So, if you reverse the polarity in the object, he claimed you could overcome gravity. And we believe this is exactly what the ancient Egyptians did and what he did. They reversed the polarity in the stone, making it the similar charge to the earth, using sound to do this,
Okay.
created an anti-gravity field. If there is no mass, there is no weight, then there is no gravity. And so we believe Edward Leeds Skalman did demonstrate how the ancient Egyptians would have built the pyramids. And that's he may have used radio waves,
Right.
but the ancients used sound waves to create an anti-gravity field. So again, he was saying, and he actually wrote a pamphlet about this, that gravity is a function of magnetism,
Hmm.
not a separate force.
Right.
And I tend to believe him, lean more towards him than the conventional physical acceptance of what gravity is. Because it's clear to me that by acoustical energy, by sound, we can overcome gravity. This has been demonstrated in the laboratory.
Right.
Again, I can give a name that people can Google. The man's name is Tom Danley,
Mm-hmm.
Danley. He's an acoustic engineer who appeared in an Emmy-winning, award-winning video, Mysteries of the Sphinx, with John Anthony West and
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Robert Schoch. And in there, Tom Danley demonstrated using sound to levitate pebbles. Only pebbles, for sure, but
Right.
the principle is there.
But the point is he did it, right?
Did it. It's been proven. And again, I think I mentioned this to you last time. We have two people who have contacted us at the Kemet School. They are graduate students at the University of Bristol in the UK. One is an engineer, one is a physicist. Tremendous combination. Their doctoral thesis is demonstrating anti-gravity using sound. And when they
Interesting.
publish, we will get their names out, we will get their work out.
That's amazing. So basically, we can say, at least with some degree of confidence, that gravity really is nothing but a type of polarity, maybe even sound itself. So when you project that sound or that frequency into a particular object, that seems to, we could say, cancel out the noise of that object, and it can start levitating.
Absolutely. What we
Right.
think, what we call the machining technique, and this has been first probed by Christopher Dunn. He calls it ultrasonic impact machining.
Hmm.
We believe they had portable tools that had a portable energy source,
Mm-hmm.
where the drill bit was rotating thousands of RPMs per second.
Wow.
It produced a sonic wave.
Huh.
This sonic wave would go in front of the tool, would go into the stone, alter the physics of stone. So for instantaneously, not using heat now. Again, people have proffered the idea of heat. No, not heat. Using sound, altering the physics of stone, it actually becomes softer. Then with a diamond tool, cuts through it like it's butter.
Like butter.
Instantly, when it cuts through, it goes back to that third dimension again. And so you don't see the evidence of heating, of melting, which people think they made concrete, they had molds, they melted. We reject all of these ideas for this idea of acoustical energy. So the idea then is the same thing producing anti-gravity. The sound would alter the physics of the object, reverse its polarity, so it was similar to the polarity of the Earth, then it rejects. It would be weightless.
Amazing. Amazing. And I tend to agree with that theory, and I think it's becoming more popular nowadays, but there have been some people that have suggested that. I remember years and years ago, before it became a little bit more mainstream. And it's amazing because when we think about the fact that this kind of research is proving that this was a highly feasible method and a probable method for how these structures were built, and we start referring back to some of the ancient scriptures, how they talk about that God is basically just sound, or it's a word. It's like, I think so many people were looking so deep into that, they were like, well, what is that sound? And it's like, no, literally it's sound, like vibrations.
There's a quote from Kabbalah, from the Jewish Kabbalah, where it has what we call the tetragrammaton,
Correct.
Yud, He, Vud, He, which is the name of God, right?
Right.
Yahweh, okay? The quote is, it is the sound that rushes through the universe. That's the name of God.
It's interesting that you get into the Kabbalah, because that was literally the next line I wanted to get into. See, like minds think alike. So with the Kabbalah, because I've actually done a lot of independent research on the Kabbalah here and there, and I've read a lot of offshoot commentaries from the Kabbalah and the actual Zohar itself. And many people, many mystics across the board say that when you understand the Kabbalah or the Zohar to really its T, then every scripture becomes absolutely comparable to you. You understand exactly what they're talking about. There is no murky waters. There is no, oh, I think this is what it is. You actually have the key, as they call it.
It's a primer.
Right. To understanding every scripture and basically everything about the universe when you understand the Zohar.
Absolutely.
So what is your experience with the Zohar in reference to what we just talked about with sound, gravity, ancient pyramids? What correlation is there?
Well, basically, my attraction to it is, of course, being born Jewish.
Okay.
So I had that connection. Also, not only being born Jewish, but I'm only a second generation American. My parents are first generation. I come from at least 10 generations of rabbis and Talmudic scholars.
Okay.
So that is there. So Kabbalah is there. So the message that we were given as young Jews about it is that you can't touch the Kabbalah until you become 45 years of age.
Correct.
Why?
Correct.
You have to get all your life journeys out of the way. Get married, have children, have a career, so that you have time for it, because it has to be a 24/7 immersed study.
Correct.
Okay. Also, the message was given to me by my father, because it was the ones that were given to him because he went to rabbinical school. Either those who dwell extensively in Kabbalah either go insane or commit suicide.
I've
See,
heard.
that's the warning. That was always the warning.
Right.
Of course, that attracted me. So, from my cousin, who is a rabbi and is very orthodox, the tradition handed down is what Kabbalah was, and I'll explain it to you in commission. What Kabbalah was the oral teachings that Moses gave that were not written down in Torah. The oral tradition. So much more extensive, of course. Well, the term itself is commission. Kabbalah. Ka is what we think of as the astral body or the personality. That it's not the physical body, which is chat, with a T ending, but Ka is like when they would show the divine creator, Knum, creating the body. He would create two bodies on his potter's wheel. The physical body, the chat, and the Ka, which is our personality, our astral, our double, okay? That stays in the tomb. So they used to actually believe when the body died, the Ka, personality, who we are, our name, dies too. So that they would make offerings to the Ka in the tomb. So Ka is that etheric double, that personality. Ba was their term for spirit. We could say soul, but we don't believe they had a concept of soul. So we use the term spirit. So spirit. Again, the per Ka was the tomb. That's where the body was held, and that's where offerings to the body was made. The per Ba, per being house, was the house of the spirit. That became your temple. That's where you would go and do practices, chanting, breathing, even taking psychedelic beverages or plants to raise consciousness, to keep you in a high state of consciousness. That was our temple. Okay. Kabbalah. Now, La is the key. As Hakim would teach, the ancient language, matriarchal language, had certain definitions. When we moved from matriarchy to patriarchy, which we are today, those definitions got reversed. So what was yes in matriarchy became no in patriarchy. Understand?
Correct.
This is why the great mystic George Gurdjieff, who I quote extensively in my book Land of Osiris, used to say the world today is topsy-turvy, meaning it's upside down. And he's right. Definitions are wrong. So la'ah in Arabic today, same in Hebrew, and coming from the Aramaic, is a term of negativity. No. La'ah actually means no in Arabic. But in the ancient language, it was an affirmation. It was yes. So Kabbalah is any teaching which affirms that we are more than the body, spirit, and personality. So yes, Kabbalah is your basic metaphysical understanding. Of course, it's your foundation teachings. It's to understand that we are more than the body, and that there's something else there that is never created, never destroyed, which continues on after the body. Yes, that's the basis of all spirituality, the basis of all religions.
That's amazing. So, in your studies, which I'm assuming you've probably looked into the Kabbalah and studied it to a notable degree, when you say the Tetragrammaton, there was sound associated with that, which
Absolutely.
What
this is key.
And that sound, what we talked about, has anybody ever been able to reproduce or attempted to reproduce that sound, or the voice of God,
yes.
as they say?
I mean, if you actually go how it's supposed to be pronounced, Yud Hey Vud Hey, it would be pronounced yeah.
Okay.
And that becomes Yahweh in English.
Okay.
But it's not pronounced that way in Hebrew. If you know anything about Judaism, you know that the name of God is never supposed to be pronounced.
Right.
So when you come to Yud Hey Vud Hey, you use the term Adonai.
Adonai.
And I'm supposed to have something on my head.
Yes. We could.
Adonai is the Atan of Akhenaten. So there's where they had that coalition, where they took the spiritual teachings of the Semites from the ancient Cometians, from what Akhenaten taught, and it was all fused together to make Judaism. Judaism is actually a fusion of many different elements, mainly Cometian and mainly Semitic, but many different elements is what the practice of Judaism to today.
Ancient
So
and
you don't pronounce it. That's the key to it. It is sacred. It is holy. You don't say yeah or Yahweh. You don't say it. So it's sacred. So yes, and I learned this from being involved with the Rosicrucians. We talked last time a little bit about them.
Right.
Rosicrucians do chanting of vowel sounds. This is the same in what we do at the sites we chant. We do vowel sounds. We know that each site, as I mentioned to you last time, mention again because it is essential to know, each pyramid, each temple, each site was tuned to a different frequency of sound. In other words, we say 360 netters, which they call gods and goddesses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. They each have a sound frequency connected to them, as well as a crystal, as well as a color, as well as many an herb. I mean, I could go on and on.
Is that sound frequency associated with each netter? Is that a static frequency, or does it alternate between a band?
Only thing it alternates, what I have found, is between male and female.
Okay.
Women hit a higher tone than we do. In other words, we know the sound of the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is supposed to open up all frequencies. That's the idea. It was the last initiation. In other words, when it ended as a functioning power plant, it became a temple of initiation in pre-dynastic times, through dynastic times, through modern times, to what we do today. When we take tourist groups in the Great Pyramid and do our chanting and meditating, we're doing an initiation. It is the same. And it opens up all frequencies of sound. But we have found the tone of the Great Pyramid is a low tone, a low basso tone for men.
Okay.
I probably can't hit it well here, and I'm not good at this. Yusuf Arian can hit it perfectly. But it's like... Women hit it a little higher because of their voice, but that's the tone. And when everybody hits it together, the pyramid comes alive.
Amazing.
That's the same. Again, that's what, like I said, at every site. If we go to the temple of Isis at Philae, Izet, and we hit the proper frequency in the Holy of Holies, everybody becomes Isis. Everybody gets filled with the energy of what she was, that netter, magic, science, relationships. I mean, she was a full defined netter, but we get that feeling. You get that feeling of love, relationships. You get the feeling when you go into the temple of Hathor at Dendara and you tone to her, you're immediately filled with the soft, beautiful energy of the feminine. Everybody gets quiet and relaxed and peaceful, and it's the arts, music, dance, theater, joy, everything comes out. So that's the whole idea of what it was all about, to open the senses within us by going to these certain sites, hitting that tone. The energy of the site activates the netter within you.
That's amazing. When you were actually just chanting the frequency of the Great Pyramids, then it actually reminded me almost to a T what the Buddhist monks and these yogis chant when they chant Om. It sounded absolutely identical.
Same.
And they say that is actually the frequency of God.
It's all the same.
Or the absolute.
All the sound. And this is why some people think I get pretty anal because I'm a stickler for pronunciation. But this is why Hakim was to me. This is the thing he was only stickler about, because the pronunciation, the sound is so important. This is why we tell people, don't use the Greek terms. Some people try to argue with me, saying the Greek terms are just as powerful. I don't say Osiris. I say Wizard. I don't say Isis. I say Izet. Hathor is good. Sekhmet is good. These are the natural ones. But every time we see a Greek term, we replace it with the Cometian term, because the sound is key. The sound is so
the
important.
Vibration, right?
And as you said, here's another thing. I once brought a great teacher who's coming back with me in February in 2008 named Satyen Raja. He lives in Canada. He's a great spiritual teacher. He was talking with Hakim, and it's been videoed, and he comes from India, of course, Raja. And he said, in the Vedas, we talk about 4 cycles, the Kali Yuga, Sat Yuga, blah, blah, blah. And you talk about 5 stages of the sun. And Hakim would look at him and say, you say 4, we say 5. Same thing.
Right.
All the chanting, all the tone, everybody says the name of God. Yes, in the Vedas, you're supposed to chant 1,001 names of God.
Right.
It's the same thing. I do a personal meditation because I was initiated into the path called Surat Shabbat Yoga. It's actually from the Sikh religion.
Okay.
Their great guru was Guru Nanak. He was like a Christ figure. So I do the meditation for that, and it's just pronouncing Vedic names of God to myself silently. It's all the same.
It's the vibrations, right?
When you tone the name of the nectar, you are toning the name of God, of course. The Egyptologists will tell you the nectars were, they were all polytheistic and they're worshiping hundreds of gods and goddesses. But at the basis of even their teaching was monotheism. There is only one uniting force principle throughout the universe, and we're only aspects of it.
Exactly, and there are many aspects. So another point that I thought was actually an interesting point that I wanted to bring up, back to the Kabbalah and frequency and vibration. There's been a lot of, I guess if you want to call, divulgence in trying to understand numerology, specifically from the perspective of vibration in reference to Kabbalah, that there's actually numbers that relate to each vibration and basically cycles of creation.
Called gematria.
So what did you ever discover, or did anybody tell you that you found extremely relevant in terms of numerology proper and the vibrations that we talked about in reference to the Kabbalah?
This is where I tend to deviate from a lot of people.
Okay.
And Hakim was the same way. Numerology, I think, is more modern.
Okay.
We don't believe the ancients actually had a mathematical system like we now. And this is where I get into a lot of problems with even colleagues like Chris Dunn. He cannot believe that anybody, an engineer, anybody doing construction, doing any type of work, could not have a standard, a mathematical system.
Okay.
But we believe, because of the knowledge of the ancient Cometians operating in 360 senses, they knew there were no absolutes.
Right.
Everything was just relative. So when they'd say one or two, of course it has to be of something. 2 books, 2 bullets, whatever.
Right.
It has to be of something. And it's only relevant to that moment. So this is what confuses a lot of people. Now, I am not a mathematically oriented person, so I never concentrated myself much on numbers and number game. People play with numbers all the time. This function, that function, this, that. But I believe this is all modern thinking. The ancients, I believe every time they built a pyramid, they built a temple, they redefined their mathematical standard. There was no standard. So in other words, each time they redefined it. And I give an example of that, and I just gave this in a lecture recently. We talk about the Great Pyramid, you talk about the numbers. The Great Pyramid has been measured 4 major times. Last one was in the 50s. First major one in the 20s, which is the numbers they use today. Every time, Joe, and this is important for you in your work, every time they have measured the Great Pyramid, they come up with different numbers. Now, of course, they say, oh, it's because we've improved our measuring. We've improved the standard, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, here's an example. The Great Pyramid is said to be, non-capped today, 454 or 451 feet high, depending on which measurement. They use the 30 feet of maybe a capstone, and they say it could have been 484 feet or 481 feet at its top. Interestingly enough, Joe, whether you use the capstone or not, the mathematics still works. So if you use 450 or 480, when you come out with pi, all the functions, the circumference of the earth, all of that you can come out from the Great Pyramid, it still works.
Right.
Here's the thing. They say that the side of the Great Pyramid is 755 feet. But yet, there is not one side of the Great Pyramid that is 755 feet. It is an average. One side is 757, one side is 754, one side is 756, and then the 4 average out to 755. So people are constantly asking, why? Well, these people who could do such exact precision, could do such exact tolerances in granite, in diorite, in basalt, why couldn't they make a straight side and have it all 4 sides the same? Because they said that everything fluctuates. Nothing stays the same from 1 minute to the next, 1 microsecond to the next. Everything is constantly moving, returning, moving, returning. So they did not see things in absolutes. That's why every time they measure the Great Pyramid, they'll come up with different numbers.
And I wonder also, not only that, but today we basically take the way we do our standards of measurements is we create a system and then try to backlog and try to come to truths by virtue of creating an arbitrary system. Whereas before, maybe those arbitrary systems weren't necessary because they were if you want to say, closer to the truth. So they just use sound frequency, and the appropriate sound frequency produced these numbers like pi, or like the speed of light, which somebody also measured. And that wasn't necessarily a product or a byproduct of good measurement, but rather being in tune with frequencies that then yielded good
Absolutely
measurements.
correct.
Right.
I do not believe they incorporated all these functions, all these standards consciously
Right.
into the Great Pyramid. But thinking in 360 senses, thinking in 4 and 5 dimensions, you're working with cosmic law. That's why the principle of Ma'at was so important. Ma'at, a feminine principle, she represented cosmic balance and order, not human. Human was fallible. So they operated in Ma'at. They were working on the principles of universal understanding, and the fact that everything shifts, everything changes. You're absolutely right. They incorporated all these things in the Great Pyramid because they were working with universal principles, not because they consciously imparted these standards into it.
So let's go back a little bit and ask this question. So I agree with you that I think, if not entirely, then a good portion of those pyramids, particularly the pyramids in Egypt and on the Giza Plateau, were built with some type of vibration sound technology. Do you think that was constructed with certain technologies we can today consider as technology, meaning some type of an electromagnetic device that produced sound, or do you think they strictly did that with just the audible capabilities of the human voice?
No, we point that out. I should have sent you a slide of this. We have a device we point out in the Cairo Museum. It's mislabeled, was found in a tomb in Saqqara in 1936 by British Egyptologist Sir Walter Emery. He found over 10,000 items made out of stone that were put in this priest's tomb, which are all pre-dynastic. It's mislabeled as a vase for lotuses.
Okay.
It is a disc. Now, we have controversy what the material is. It is labeled as being schist. We don't think it's schist. Our geologist thinks it's more of a granitic stone because Hakim tells us it is a disc that has 3 lobes in it. It looks like an impeller or a propeller. Has little lips, 3 lips on it, and it has a center hole, a spoke, obviously to spin. Hakim would tell us these devices would spin at an ultrasonic frequency, producing a sound wave. Also part of the device is a large device, also made out of the same material, which he said was a mirror, a reflecting device. The sound wave would go out, would hit this device, come back, produce what we call sinusoidal waves.
Okay.
In the wells, and again, this is shown in this documentary that John Anthony West did in 1992 with acoustic engineer Tom Danley discussing this, showing that when they produce the sinusoidal waves, in those wells, gravity does not exist. So they use stone tools, stone objects, but they chose the stone for its vibratory frequency. Why they loved granitic stone, basalt, diorite, granodiorite, and granite, and even harder, because it's crystalline content, full of crystal to produce energy and transmit energy. And the granite itself, which we know now from our geologists, it's the tightness of the bond of the feldspar of the granite, which gives its ability to produce sound. We have a little demonstration. If you came to me to Egypt, everybody that comes to me to Egypt, there's a fallen obelisk in the Temple of Karnak at Luxor. It's laying on its side. There's ropes around it. You're not supposed to go to it. Hakim showed this to me the first time I went to Egypt with him. I showed it to everybody else. We have everybody stand by the obelisk, put your ear to the stone. I pound on the stone with just my fist, and it rings like a bell. And they all did. So this was a civilization bathed in infrasound. Constantly stones vibrating in harmonic frequencies that we could hear orderly and we could not hear. But it was there, pushing our immune systems up. We believe, again, the source of the ideas of the patriarchs of the Old Testament living to hundreds of years. Methuselah, 900 some odd years. We believe the ancient Cometians did live hundreds of years because the sound was keeping everyone's immune system in its higher state of operation. No viruses, no bacteria was supposed to infect us.
I wonder what
they chose to live as long as they wanted.
I wonder what, now on that note, I wonder what would actually, what frequency or sound frequency and at what rate one would have to be engaged in basically these sound frequencies to live, several hundreds of years. Because I do believe that's possible. Absolutely. I think people can.
People are working on it now. If you interview a man named Len Horowitz, they're
Okay.
doing now with the not 438, 440 being the pure A,
Okay.
but 432. They're also working what they call the solfeggio frequency, which is 538. That
Okay.
these frequencies of sound really act on the human body. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. But again, it's the fact of all of this sound just working together. I mean, and we're all in that frequency,
Hmm.
all bathed in that ultrasonic frequency of sound continually. We do demonstrations. We show this. We show how they do sound. They use sound for healing at Saqqara. And we do a lot of that. I mean, there's no doubt about it to us now because we work with these sound frequencies all the time. And this is why every culture, every human existent society has had some form of music.
Hmm.
Every. Universal. Always, as soon as they beat a drum, as soon as they found that string, a gut, and they strung it and they plucked it, as soon as freak sound was able to make that we could hear, dealing with the sound we we're living with, people produce sound
Hmm.
for positive things. And for negative things. We know, of course, there are sonic weapons that sound can be used as a weapon.
Correct. What the police and the military police have used to put people down, they can't even hear it. It just makes their head ring and they get an extreme pain. Um,
You can actually Google this. In the first Gulf War, when it was Bush Senior, when Saddam had gone into Kuwait and was starting to mess with their oil industries, and then it was the story that the Republican Guard of Saddam Hussein. This was in the late '90s, before 2001. The Republican Guard were the toughest fighting unit in the world. We're going to have trouble with them. And then all of a sudden, we read these reports where the Republican Guard of the Iraqis were surrendering to the Americans en masse, thousands of a time, thousands at a time, and they were all complaining of nausea, vertigo, vomiting, projectile diarrhea. What was going on? We were experimenting with a sonic beam weapon in 1998.
mhm.
That's why they surrendered en masse. Yes, they
Right.
couldn't. They couldn't exist. They had to. I mean, so yeah.
Well,
It's
what
and
about
again,
this?
there's also talk that what is the B-1 bomber that becomes invisible to radar is that it produces an anti-gravity field
Uh-huh.
around. No mass cannot register on radar.
So there's
These things have been used.
th-
So another, I'll just bring one more point up and then we can move on.
Okay.
But when Chris Dunn produced his book in 1998, The Giza Power Plant, he was not connected, he was not contacted by Egyptologists
Okay.
or by people who wanted, he was contacted by NASA and by the
Really?
U.S. government wanting to know if there was military applications of what he was saying.
Now, what about this? So, back on the frequency thing, how does, let's say, like this microphone or a rock or this t shirt, every physical object probably has, not probably, but does have a corresponding vibration to it that when if we project a certain vibration at it, we could either alter it, nullify it, give it
Right.
anti-gravity properties as such.
Right.
How would one discover what the vibration of any particular object is? Is there a method for that, or is it just by trial and
Experimentation.
error?
Yes, I was going to bring up a name, and your discussion now brought back a name. Have you ever heard the name Royal Raymond Rife?
Yes,
R-I-F-E.
yes, I have
Okay.
actually.
Created what was called a frequency generator in the 30s.
Okay.
Claimed he could match with his frequency generator the frequency of every virus and every bacteria.
Oh wow.
And when you produce the same frequency, it would annihilate the object.
Huh. The same frequency as the
So if
object,
they're
or
producing-
a
or if we're
180
producing
degree?
all these wonderful positive frequencies,
Uh huh.
positive energies of sound, ultrasound, infrasound that we don't necessarily hear, but it acts on our body. It's destroying cancer, it's destroying viruses, it's destroying this and that, and that's why people were able to be healthy. Yes, you think about our lives today, Joe. You think about how people live. Like I grew up in New York City,
Mhm.
and I couldn't get away with New York City. Why? From it. Why? It's constantly being bombarded by noise pollution.
Right.
You have horns, you have sirens, you have this and that, constantly bad vibrations. That's why living in the inner cities, people go crazy.
Right.
The noise is terrible. It's already been proven, these experiments have done, if you have women giving birth and you use them in a room where you have natural colors, green, and natural essences, flowers, herbs, and you're producing Bach and wonderful sound, people can have childbirth without pain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've
Same-
heard that before.
And they're using sound has been used as far as the same as acupuncture and acupressure. sound has been shown to produce positive psychological effects in human beings and can be used in positive. I mean, again, I'm very good friends with a gentleman in Boulder, Colorado. He's a well-known musician named Jonathan Goldman. He is a sound healer.
Okay.
I'm going to be interviewed by him in a week or so.
Okay.
Where we're going to talk about sound healing.
Amazing. Well, maybe we could tangent off our third interview. We could tangent off of that and do more about the frequencies, because the more we dig into this stuff, whether it is magic or mysticism or Kabbalah or Egyptology or chematology, then it seems like the common denominator and the bottom line is sound frequency.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's the bottom line.
The bottom line.
Mean, again, when I first connected with Hakim, because of his ability to look through a person, he knew I had a background already in archaeology. I already had a background as a Rosicrucian in metaphysics, so I had a good background. He wanted me to concentrate on sound and water.
Okay.
The knowledge that the ancients had of both and the interplay of both. Why? Why did they build these tunnels first? To bring water to the Giza Plateau? Because sound travels hundreds of times faster in water than it does in air.
Interesting.
They were using the water also to amplify the sound. So that's why there's tunnels under every site in Egypt, water tunnels. And the water is still flowing. If one concentrates, one gets into that state, one can connect and hear the water still flowing under the sites. There's water still flowing under the Great Pyramid.
Right. I remember actually reading a lot about that, and nobody understands where that water came from or why it was there.
It's in my book, The Land of Osiris. It came from the Western Desert. They built these artificial tunnels, 50 miles or more, to connect with underground water tunnels out in what is known the underground Nile, the underground Nile River, which is in the Western Desert, and they would bring that water to the current Nile Valley. That's why they built all the tunnels, to bring the water to the sites, to every site. And what we know now is what we call the Valley of the Kings, where everybody goes to see the so-called tombs of the pharaohs.
Right.
They were not tombs.
Right.
They were all originally water tunnels that were modified into tombs.
Interesting.
Because the acoustics are incredible. Wherever we go, we test the acoustics. And there's actually a field. This is what I'm going to be discussing with Jonathan. The field is now called archaeoacoustics.
Okay.
It's studying how ancient civilizations use sound. And again, Joe, we say it was all over the world. We find it in Peru. We find it in Bolivia. We found it in Lebanon. People find it in Turkey. Find it. All of these ancient structures are acoustically tuned.
Now, what about this? So, is it just acoustic in the sense that it's an audible sound? Because sound vibration is what? It's electromagnetic frequency, right? So we have basically 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is the audible sound frequency. But did they use anything beyond or below the audible sound frequency?
Talking about infrasound.
Right.
Infrasound, and ultrasound, which we can't hear, of course.
So it went way beyond even what we can audibly hear.
What produces the frequency? Listen again. What produces that sound? The water. Now, I've always said when I talk to people, when you discuss what's called a sacred site, a power place, a vortex, three things are always present: underground running water, a natural source of crystal, and what are called igneous rock, which is crystalline stone granite. So it is the water running with the crystal rock stone produces the electromagnetic field that we experience when we go to these sites. When we meditate, we feel energy. We feel energized, as we would say. It's because of the energy field, which normally maybe cannot be detected. I think there are instruments now that can detect these. They're very weak fields, but they act on our bodies. And so that's what is going on at every one of these sites. I'd say everywhere I go, if there's a sacred site and we can find acoustics. And so then we're saying, Joe, how they placed the stone and the stones that they used, in what combinations: limestone, granite, diorite, basalt, calcite, quartzite, all these different stones in the particular combinations they used at each site, combined with the running water. That was the frequency of sound for that site.
Amazing. Amazing. So,
and we can't hear it. You can't hear it only with your, again, what we say, your inner ear. We would talk like this when people would say, okay, you have 360 senses. You say, I saw a dream last night.
Right.
No, you weren't. Your eyes were closed. You were sleeping.
Correct.
You're using the vehicle of the eyes.
Correct.
I heard this vibration, but you didn't hear it with your ears. You sensed it, right? You sensed. We used that term. Oh, you used your sixth sense. We put that extra number on it. 5 more than 5, 6. Well, we have 360. So we have to go all the way to 360. But it is sensing things. So we do not hear the infrasound, but our body reacts to it, picks it up, registers. Everything, again, we have a very, actually, as human beings, we have a very low range compared to other animals of auditory sound frequency.
Let me ask you this, because this actually brings up another point that I think is a very interesting feature to look into. So if we can say that basically everything is an electromagnetic frequency, which we'll call sound or acoustics, which either can produce or basically dismantle physical objects, the question is what exactly is the source of those frequencies? What causes those fluctuations to even happen in the first place? Did you guys ever think about that?
I'm not following again. I told you the water operating with this crystalline stone produces the frequency. So
right. Oh, so okay. So basically, my question is, if there's the electromagnetic frequency is basically something in itself, but before it actually becomes a specific frequency, what is it before that, or is it actually the crystal that causes that? It's kind of a back and forth. It's a back and forth.
Again, where you have a natural vortex, a natural power place, like in the U.S. Well, you are Mount Shasta in California, Sedona in Arizona. It's because the water is operating with the crystal naturally, so there's no structures there. What the Cometians did with the understanding is to go to like the Giza Plateau, where water is already running in with the natural limestone that's there. So then take the limestone, construct it in this wonderful geometric shape, which is a star tetrahedron, which is what a pyramid is. And it's the shape, the geometry, acting with the stone and the crystal and the water. That's what causes your energy frequency.
That's incredible again. So it really is basically, it really does seem like it comes down to it. There's no source that created anything. It's a back and forth play between energy and matter.
It is, and again, the Rosicrucians used to use a term. Instead of talking about God, they would sometimes say the supreme mind or supreme being, but then they would say this expression, which is my favorite Rosicrucian expression. All, A-L-L, all is vibration. It's nothing else. That's it. There's nothing else.
That's kind of amazing, right?
It's vibration. And now comes Nikola Tesla, and he says, if you understand frequency and vibration, you understand everything. And so that's the mind of God. What is the mind of God? The frequency and vibration.